Hello and welcome to episode number 10 of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. Today is Sunday, August 10th, 2014. I'm Melissa Agnes, and this podcast is brought to you by Agnes Day. Let's talk crisis intelligence. Hey, Tegan. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me here today. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
Hi, I'm Tegan Ford. I'm a graduate of the Communications and Master's program at Carleton University, where I specialize in crisis communications with a focus on social media. Since then, I've held several communications positions. I'm currently working for a large governmental corporation, and yeah.
And when did you graduate? You graduated it's been 2 years now?
I graduated in September.
Of last year?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So almost a year.
Yeah. Almost a year. So 2013.
Yeah.
Excellent. So we met when you reached out to me when you were doing your thesis.
Yes.
We had a nice conversation.
Yeah, you were one of my favorite experts that I spoke to.
Oh, I thank you. And you actually, I do that often for students, and there was something special about you, not about the questions you asked, but the conversation we had about, your thesis when I saw the final product.
Right.
And we've kept in touch ever since, which is really nice. And we're both Canadian.
Yeah.
So let me start with the basics, or let me start at the beginning, I should say. What was it that drew you to studying crisis, or focusing on crisis communication? Because I feel like it's a trend right now, and all the students, when I do guest lectures and that, they'll all write to me after, tweet with me after, and say, "Wow, you have such a cool job, and this is what I want to do." So, what was it that really drove you to studying and focusing on that?
Right. I'd like to think that I came a little bit before the curve, before the pre-scandal era, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I do.
I think there's going to be a lot of high school students coming out thinking, I'm going to be Olivia Pope, and then that's it. So I think I came before then. And what really did it for me was I did my undergrad in psychology. So I definitely enjoyed the sort of almost like a manipulation aspect that you could do with communications and how people interpret things and how you can word things. I definitely enjoyed the science of that. And then I thought I would just continue on in a slightly different way in the communications world, going to school, doing my master's in communications. And then I would notice things like the BP oil spill, and then how they responded to that, with pros and cons to how they did that. But that sort of thing. And then I just kept noticing more and more, and I was thinking, you know what, I could be in this field for sure. I have something to offer. And so I just kept, digging deeper and enjoying it even more along the way. Excellent.
And so you found a passion for it, which I think that a lot of us do. It's like me. This is not what I thought I would be doing. And yet life brought me here, and I've never been so passionate about anything.
Right.
So as a student, looking at the potential for following your career in crisis communication, helping organizations, work their way through, communicate effectively and efficiently to regain control of their reputation and not lose out on their bottom line in times of need or in, drastic situations. So looking at that as a student, and then looking back on that now as a professional, what's different, or what's the same, or what are you really, have there been any curveballs or some big reality check set? Because it's one thing to be a student, it's another thing to practice out in the field. So what has that been like for you over the last year?
Well, when I was a student, or specifically when I was doing my thesis on crisis communications and social media's impact on that, I knew that there were many books and theories, and I read them all. I knew all of them. They're all in my thesis, right? I know that there's the theoretical side, but I always wanted to find the practical, to get down to what people can actually do, what the corporation, here are steps you can follow to get out of. That was my aim for my thesis. So given that I wanted to have this very practical thesis, I'm surprised now that I've done some corporate work that there are definitely some roadblocks in the way, that they can't just follow the steps that I pointed out in my thesis, right? I'm like, here are 10 steps, you do them, you're done, you can get out of it, no problem.
Crisis resolved.
Yeah, exactly. So like as a student, even though I knew that I wanted a practical approach, I'm surprised how much there are, roadblocks in the way, and I can discuss those, but there's definitely roadblocks in the way that I didn't think of when I was as a student reading, the theories and the other guides out there, and then also publishing my own guides. I didn't quite know the corporate culture that's in there that could definitely stand in your way.
Oh, absolutely. Corporate culture, internal politics within organizations, especially large organizations, they're often the hurdles that we have to face as professionals. And, it's happened to probably all of us at one point, where sometimes you have the answer and you do have that, you can clearly see it, that this is the situation and this is how you fix it. And yet the organization, for whatever reason, is scared. It doesn't fit with their ideal, way of thinking, or whatever it is. They just don't want to do that. And then, you get into a hurdle with, when you're working internally for an organization, it's I think a little bit difficult. I'm lucky as a consultant where I can say, listen, I'll leave you with everything that, I really believe will get you out of this in my experience in the past. But if you don't take it, I'm so sorry, but there's nothing what do you want me to do for you? I have that guide that you're talking about, and it's not the way you want to go for whatever reason. And there's nothing, I look at that when I look at a lot of, I think we've all experienced cases like that to lesser degrees, fortunately for me. But you look at different things like the crisis for MMA, the railway that happened in the explosion in Lac Mégantic last summer. Yeah. And you look at the representative, the Edward Burkhardt, and you look at the way that he communicated, and you think that sometimes maybe there's things in the background. Maybe they didn't have the right training, which they should have. Maybe they didn't have the right counsel with them, by them side, guiding them the right way throughout the crisis. But then you kind of think, well, maybe it's also the person. Maybe they didn't have the right person on the front lines, and for whatever reason, he is there. And my reflection is always, this person who's there and who's giving off this very, the opposite of what's needed. He's giving off that presence and answers and, allure. And you think, could I have helped him? And sometimes you think, I probably couldn't have, because he probably just isn't the right person to be doing what he needed to do. I don't know if that makes any sense. But anyways, my point is to say that I completely understand the roadblocks that you've probably been faced with and will continue to be faced with as your career goes on, which we all have them. Not everybody is a good fit for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm finding more and more that it is better to have an external, someone like yourself, your company, to come in and give these orders, at least, because then you're not dealing with the politics, like you said, because there's definitely that exists, and then the silos of different groups doing different things with a mixed message coming out to the public, and instead of just one clear voice, there's a group over here releasing that and a group over there, just because it's a large corporation,
Yeah.
So like if we had, if there was one, like yourself, one corporation coming in and saying, do this in this way, it's much clearer. The message doesn't get as muddied as it comes down the path to those who are actually at the front of the lines doing social media or whatnot, right? So
I can see probably, and there's probably a psychological effect there where somebody's been hired by, upper executives or upper management, and they've been told to come in and they're here to help us, so we have to listen to them. Yeah. So as opposed to, I work with this person every day, and, people are people, and sometimes maybe things just go through one ear and out the other.
Right. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. You don't want to step on any toes because they're your superior there, and you don't want to, you can't really have any power to say anything. And then, so who's gonna take charge? No one's taking charge. And yeah,
I can see that being very frustrating, especially because I'm somebody who, I'm not, I don't know what the right word is. I guess the right word is that I'm a strong leader.
Right.
And so I would find that particularly, personally, very challenging.
Yeah.
Very, very challenging. And do you find that there's ways to work around that? So maybe after, I'm just throwing this out there and asking you a question, but maybe so you're in an experience like that, and you can see it, what should be done and what's being done incorrectly and the repercussions of those actions.
Yeah.
Would it be worth it to write up a report afterwards, specifying, and instead of specifying people who may have made mistakes, specifying roles or functionalities that just did not work, or miscommunication, or gaps in communication, or whatever it may be, outlining that in a very politically correct, professional document, and then handing that to upper management with recommendations for improvement? Do you think that would be... Is it a tactic or a technique that you've tried, or that you feel would be beneficial to you and to the company?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say it would be beneficial to the company for sure. I mean, it would be something that I would definitely need the guts to do, but it's something that should be done for, the case of improving, and next time we'll be able to do certain things differently. But it's still the whole politics and who, don't step on someone's toes, and they're the one deciding, and there's still that internal, corporate culture that definitely stands in my way. But I think one day I would definitely write a report like that.
The big challenge.
Yeah.
That's what I love about, I do a lot of, my company does a lot of crisis simulations for our clients, and that's what I love. You finish a simulation, and the debriefing afterwards is what could have been better? What could have been stronger, and why? Where do we need to fix the plan? Because everything is always good in theory.
Yeah.
A pretty, 10-step guide is good in theory, but when you get down to doing it, is the communication, is the chain of command appropriate? Are people taking on too many responsibilities within their roles that it's just nothing is getting done efficiently? Or, is the room physically too small? Are people too dispersed across a very large building? Because, with some companies have 5,000 people within one building, and you actually have to go from floor to floor to get the right information. Yeah. So, so that's the value of testing the plan. And I always like to say testing the plan rather than testing the people. Right. Because that mentality there is that nobody's wrong. It's just, how could we fix the plan?
Yeah.
So that's always interesting. So, and it's interesting to hear from you, what you've been experiencing and how it differed from your perception as a student, especially for me, because I knew you as a student, and then I know you as a professional. So that's fun. Yeah.
No, I definitely knew that my thesis and the 10, best practices, these are the 10, just follow them. I knew it was a little too, in a perfect world, I knew that. I just didn't know how much was out there that will stand in your way, that you have to get over to actually implement these steps and implement them effectively. So it's interesting for sure.
And do you find that, there's so many different blocks. There's depending on the organization. Yeah. So, I could ask a million questions, and the answer could be yes here and no, or yes for you and no for somebody else, or no for you, but yes for you in the next company that you're working with. So
different cultures for sure out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in terms of, I recently did a podcast. I'm sure it will have aired by the time we publish this one, with my colleague and friend Karen Freberg, who's a professor at the University of Louisville in Kentucky, who's just this really, my opinion, it's really fabulous professor, really fabulous professional and scholar in terms of crisis communication and in terms of social media and all of that. And what she's about to teach her first crisis communication focused course next semester. And she's working on her syllabus now, and one of the challenges that she says that she's facing is to find a really good balance between bringing the theory into the classroom and bringing the practice into the classroom. So reflecting on, well, knowing what you're experiencing firsthand now while you're working, and reflecting on what you experienced and what was brought into your classrooms while you were a student. How do you feel that, did you feel like there was a good balance between theory and practice for this particular subject?
Well, truthfully, no. I would say in my master's, and this is different. Undergrad, I hear that there are these classes that are coming. They certainly weren't there in my day, but they are coming now. When I was in my master's, I had to sort of create this course for myself so that I could, get this advice, like practical knowledge from experts like yourself. I went out and did interviews, and so I actually got, the nitty-gritty information that I needed that I would certainly not get in my coursework at all, and I didn't get in my coursework at all. There was really no overlap between what I learned in class and what I learned in my thesis, but that is why I chose a very practical thesis, like with the research method that I chose with the interviews, and actually going, to the experts themselves and saying, what are the steps? Like, how do you do this with social media? How is it impacted? And actually find what is going on in the real world, quote unquote. So that I would definitely say that they need to have courses out there, and just the fact that they have them is a big step forward in my opinion. So whatever she teaches, I'm sure it's going to be helpful for the students.
Oh, absolutely. I have full faith in her. I have less faith in everybody.
Right.
In all those other classes that, maybe not have the same type of mind that she has as a professor.
Right.
But so that's interesting. And it's really a profession, in my opinion, that needs practice. And you just said that case in point earlier, where theory is great, and then you get out there and you need. Have you done any guest lectures since?
No.
Oh,
I wrote something for the Canadian government, and they were doing some sort of lecture with it, just using my notes, but I never actually went there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it something you'd be interested in?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I think I have definite information from you as well as in the field that I could share with students that are looking for something, that they can actually hold on to instead of, Benoit's theory and Grunig's theory, like all these theories are great, but there's so much more to it than even, the theories give the students. So
absolutely. Well, I'm going to introduce you to Karen.
All right.
See where that goes.
Yeah.
Excellent. So what else would you say, I don't know, here's a good question. Do you continue to love and to have the same passion now that you're out in the real world for this subject?
Definitely. It was definitely fun reading about everything, and when you do a master's, you read everything. So it was definitely enjoyable to know what was out there, in books and other people's research, but to actually go out and experience it is totally different and in the best way possible.
Absolutely. Well, it's awesome to hear, especially since so many people zigzag these days.
Right.
Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with zigzagging. I did.
Yeah.
But it's nice when I guess it's nice at a young age when you kind of find your path early on.
Yeah.
It's always great.
Yeah.
And what's next for you?
I think I definitely want to do more crisis management, and as more an external, I would say, because internally there are definitely roadblocks, and so it'd be good to be that external company coming in and saying, here's what you can do, and then you have to listen because you hired us, like that sort of approach, as opposed to sort of giving suggestions here and there, and then they trickle through the path and not really getting anywhere, and it's more frustrating like that. So that's what I'm hoping for.
It'll be nice to bring that experience.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely learning things from the experiences that I've had. So I don't regret anything. It's very enjoyable, everything that I have seen, but I would like to be on the other side. I'd like to try that.
Excellent. And what do you, for the people who are listening to this, who like you are perhaps, perhaps have a clear vision of where the organization should be in terms of crisis preparedness and crisis management, and they're facing their version of, internal obstacles. What do you have any advice or tips, or just personal experience and personal learnings or aha moments that you've experienced that might just give them something to think differently about, if for those that might be sitting there struggling?
I wish I had more advice. I don't know if I've mastered that yet. I think I'm still with them. I'm with you struggling as well. But I could just say more, like from a higher level, I would say there needs to be more improvement in large corporations so that they have, that they go through that drill that you mentioned. That would be good for every corporation, and to know who should be saying what and where, and how you can get this mass of people in your organization to be one clear voice somehow. Like that's what I would say. And maybe listen to those who know things around you, and
be open to new ideas.
No matter where they come from. That's all I have to say. Yeah.
One thing that I see in that is, and to help with that, is that you need to educate. The team needs to be educated. They need to understand the importance, because you can't just tell somebody you need to do this. Like that, the kid who asks the parents, can I do this? And they say no, and you say why, or they say why, and they say, the response is because I said so. You can't be like that with anybody, but within an organization, because there's no knowledge that comes with that. People don't retain that or understand why, so they're not going to follow. However, in my experience, employees of organizations, typically, they're with an organization because they believe in the organization, or they really love their job, or they're passionate about some line of what they do. And their intent is not to further damage the reputation of their organization in a crisis or at any point. That's not their intent. So by the first step, in my experience and in my opinion, is to educate. They need to understand why the company needs to have one voice. They need to understand why there is a role for spokesperson, and also why the front line needs to communicate with the other members of the team. It needs to be communicated with key executives within the crisis management team, and needs to communicate appropriately with the external audience. So the first step is, in theory, to educate, to focus a lot on how can you communicate this and show the repercussions. The next step, so you mentioned that practicing is good. Practicing is really great, and launching, something realistic like a crisis simulation is really great, because you can give them the opportunity to make their mistakes, and you can show them the repercussions. So and then the more you practice, the better you get. And the more confident you get, the more you understand your role, the more you understand how to communicate with, your fellow members on your team. And so I guess that would be my overview of a response to that, would be start with educating.
Yeah. And in addition, trust your employees. Like you said, that the employees are here because they obviously enjoy being there or respect the company, or else they wouldn't be there. So let them, trust them enough to give them the information that they need to do their part of crisis communications, don't block them out, so that, and then they're going in blind, and just because you don't trust everyone in your company, you just sort of have to, they're here, they're with you, let's just do it,
Trust them to be responsible adults with the organization's best interests in their heart. Absolutely. It's so important. And that too can take practice. Yeah. It's not everybody who's able to let go of the reins. And in a crisis, the leader can't do everything. He or she needs a strong team behind them. And that's so important. So important. When you have a really well-structured plan and a really well-structured crisis team, you may not, in most cases, you won't bring in what happens internally to figure out the pieces of the puzzle. What happened? Why did it happen? What's true? What's not true? What's being said? What do we need to do right away? Right down to the point where you're actually coaching your spokesperson, who perhaps might be the CEO of the company, for example, if it's a crisis that really needs to involve the CEO of the company being front and center with the media, with the public. You want to make sure that when that CEO gets called into the room, that you don't want to be positioned in a place where your team has just spent 2 hours putting together the pieces and developing a plan, and now they need to coach the CEO on what he or she needs to say when he or she goes out into, the public's eye. Because let's not make it sound like the CEO hasn't been doing anything in these last 2 hours. Here, they've had their responsibilities, and they were doing whatever they needed to do. But my point is that you can't, when it's time to bring that person in and brief them, you can't have a CEO, for example, that's saying, no, I don't think that's the right strategy. I don't think that that's what we should do. Let's go back to the drawing board. One, time is running out. And two, that's why it's so important to have a strong team that knows exactly what they're doing and what's expected of them, and understand that whatever they do, the cause and effect, whatever they do has a repercussion. Will that repercussion be good or bad for the organization and for the outcome of the crisis?
Right.
Well, it's important.
Yeah.
There should be a training just on that.
Yeah.
How to let go of the reins and trust your team.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
The inner workings. I find it so interesting that your focus was crisis communications, and not just crisis communications, but the impact that social media and the digital world has on communicating in a crisis. So we talked a little bit about what you experienced in school, what you experienced out in the field, and how they work together or didn't. Mm-hmm. What about in terms of, you did a really good job at finding professionals who are out there doing it every day and interviewing them and getting their feedback and input. But when you're looking at it, when you're on the front lines and you're dealing with actual issues that are really happening, they're not theory anymore, and it's on the organization for which you work, and you're seeing what's unfolding online, do you feel like, even with all of your work that you put into, your thesis and your studies, do you feel like you were adequately prepared for that?
I think, well, yes and no. I mean, I think no, you could always learn more, and you could always be more prepared. Though I did think that I had a good solid base to know what was going well and what was going wrong. That's for sure. I could identify that, but actually putting it into practice was a little more challenging than you'd expect. But I think overall my interviews and my research did provide me a fair amount of background knowledge to get the job done.
That's good. And have you noticed, because I noticed on my end that we all know that things continue to evolve, and
yeah.
Have you, in the course of the last almost a year, have you noticed a big evolution in terms of anything, trends, platforms, ways that people communicate with each other, with organizations? Has there been a drastic evolution somewhere that you noticed?
Well, I think definitely corporations and large government bodies and that kind of groups definitely are realizing that social media is part of their day-to-day activity as well as in a crisis. Like they're becoming, everyone's jumping on the bandwagon for that. They're buying into it. So I'm definitely noticing more of that, and then just what they need to do now that they have it. That's where there's a little bit of a gap, and still room for improvement for sure. Now that all these corporations are on, so there's a trend that way. But then there needs to be even more of a trend of doing it well.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm seeing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And do you think that it's harder? You work for a governmental organization. Do you think that maybe certain challenges would be easier or harder working for more of a corporate organization? Or do you think that what you're experiencing is very corporate and I want to say, what's the right word? Not normal, but consistent, I guess, across the board.
Right. I think I don't think it's the type of organization. I think it's the size that really matters. I think with the more employees and the different silos and different people in charge of one thing and not the other. One person's in charge of the traditional media outlets, another one's in charge of the social media, and they don't really talk. And like that kind of thing, I think happens more as the organization gets bigger and goes across country or internationally even. So I think that's where I'm seeing it, as opposed to corporate versus government versus, private companies. I think it's the size that matters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a good answer. And I had a question that you just made me think of, and it just escaped my mind. But I think that you're absolutely right. And, one thing that I notice often is kind of like what you were saying with that whole not being able to necessarily let go of all of the reins, but also social media has always been in its own silo. Yes, PR uses it. Yes, marketing uses it. Yes, now business development and HR are using it, but it's always been social media,
right?
Which is why which starts off with why I really dislike the term social media crisis, just because I don't think that that's something that exists.
Right.
Social media is a tool.
Yeah.
Crisis is a communication tool, and it's a crisis is a crisis no matter where it originates, and no matter where it originates, it will end up on social.
Yeah.
But what I'm noticing, and I notice this the most when I test clients and I kind of add in elements where I know that I'm really going to be testing this, is that people are noticing that, okay, so this person is responsible for responding to the media. Is not the spokesperson, but media calls. He or she has 30 minutes to, according to the plan, to get back to any media call that comes in with questions in a crisis.
Yeah.
And in one particular recent case, that person's role, they were to communicate with one of the key members of the crisis management team. They needed to that person was expected to give a person within that room, the command center, an update every 30 minutes, or if they had any questions, they were to go to that person. But in reality, that person is sitting in a room being fed information from outside of those walls, working with the people within those walls to figure out the solution of what needs to be done. That person's head is not in exactly precisely what's being said in the externally from the organization about the organization. They're being kept in the loop on, regular updates, but those updates are not the same as experiencing it.
Right.
And what I see happen very frequently is that person, that role, whose job it is to communicate with the media, comes in and says, I need to be in the same room as social media, because it's just completely in sync with one another. Reporters are on Twitter. Reporters are also calling in. And why would there be a disconnect there? So my point is, I'm watching how social media, through practice, is losing its own confinement or its own silo to be, you're on social media, so that's what you do, and becoming more an intricate and very necessary, important part of communication as a whole, not just on social media, but working together with all aspects of the communication team within that crisis management team. So that's something that I've been noticing, and to your point earlier, it's making sense, because it needs to be there needs to be a connection there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, how can the message be clear if they're not in the same room talking, getting the input from both areas? And
absolutely. And more often than not, the input is why duplicate the work? The input is coming in on one channel, coming in on the other channel. It's the same information, or the same questions, or the same needs and the same demands.
Right.
Why double the work, or double reporting to two different people who then need to report to each other, or having two people report to one person and double that, what that person is receiving as input.
Definitely.
No, it's interesting. It's interesting to see it all evolve.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, it used to be social media. Oh, that's social media, and now it's not. It's just it's a medium. That's all it is at this point. Yeah.
Yep. And the same with the search engines.
Yeah.
The search engines. If you want to test an organization how they handle a reputational crisis, well, start putting up a crisis that's being, a simulated crisis that's being talked about and blogged about and written about on major news sites, because it's gathering that much information, and start to have a search engine results page for, the company name, for example, that starts to update in real time over the course of 5 or 6 hours. And you start to see, news for company XYZ is now above the company's website, which it never was before.
Right.
So test reputation, and then you bring in your online reputation is your reputation.
Yeah.
It has to be all of these roles, all of these silos, all of these functions and departments need to work together.
Definitely. Agreed.
I know you agree, and I know that it's one of your challenges that you're watching.
Yeah.
But I definitely do think that it's going to, when you make your way to the other side of the table, it's going to give you a really, really great value and understanding to have been on the inside.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Understand those obstacles.
Yeah.
And also,
and I know them now. Yeah.
and you'll continue to.
Yeah.
And then maybe eventually you'll do something like write that report or something, and then watch it click in other people's minds, because sometimes that's what it takes.
Right.
Just to see it and to have it laid out in a different way, and you start to mull it over differently and think of that experience too.
Yeah.
Of accomplishing that. Tegan, it's always such a pleasure to speak with you. If you could, so for these schools and the students, because there's a lot of both that follow, the podcast and the blog. For those out there who are listening to this, what would be, either for students or either for professors or educational institutions or for both, what would be something that you would want to leave them with that you feel could maybe help them through an obstacle or help them prepare for something, or in your experience of, a year ago you were in school and now you're out in the field, and what you've learned in both circumstances?
I think what I could offer the listeners here is when I was doing my master's, there wasn't a clear program that I wanted, and it was all sort of, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But I was so determined to create a course of crisis communications and social media's impact that's what I did my thesis on. And so I went out to get interviews, as I said earlier, and so I created that. So I would say, advice for those who are in school right now: if the school is not offering exactly what you want, just go get it then. Go piece it together another way. Go talk to people. Even if you're not doing a thesis, just talk to them anyways and get that information so that you can have something else if it's just not cutting it,
I love that. Because this educational institutions, and not just to pick on them, not just to single them out, but
yeah.
There's so much, everything is evolving so quickly, and new opportunities and new, ways of doing things and new professions are emerging continually, that I love the idea of being a go-getter and making it yourself. If you have a vision of something, like, look, okay, when I did start, I have a confession. When I started in this profession, I used the term social media crisis. At the time, that it was more issues than crisis, but at the time it was very timely, it was very relevant, it took me a while to develop my own sense of, I don't like that term for the reasons that I don't like it. Look, people are still out there today using it all over the place. But nobody was doing what I had a vision of doing at the time. And I was lucky because I came into it when I knew there was a need, and there was also a gap in the market, so I got to experience and work with, just like you're saying, these really great, crisis professionals who had been at it for years and years, had this great reputation, great experience to learn from, who just didn't do my side of things.
Right.
So I kind of developed a niche for myself, which is now a niche,
Yeah.
which is now a focus and is now being taught in schools. So I love the idea of you advising, students on just go get it.
Yeah.
Nothing is impossible today. Nothing is off the table.
Definitely, yeah. Just
Absolutely.
create it.
Just create. If there's a need for it, create the answer.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that. Always such a pleasure to talk with you, Tegan. Where can people find and follow you?
You can follow me at Twitter at Tegan F, TEGANF, or you can go to my site about.me/TeganF. Either way, you'll get to the same stuff.
Excellent. And there's, of course, going to be a link at the bottom of wherever this podcast will be published. So iTunes, Stitcher, and the Crisis Intelligence blog over at agnesday.com. Excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this week's episode of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. Stay tuned next Sunday when I speak with Jane Jordan Meyer and we discuss the leader's role within a crisis. We appreciate all of your support. And if you could share this podcast and even go on iTunes and Stitcher and write us a review, we'd really appreciate it. Also, if you'd like to send us your thoughts and feedback, as well as any questions and suggestions for topics of crisis communications that you'd like to hear about, we definitely want to hear from you. If you have any questions for Tegan from this week's podcast, then send me your questions. I'll get them to Tegan, and I will get you an answer in the form of a blog post on the Crisis Intelligence blog over at agnesday.com. Thanks so much for tuning in this week, and I look forward to talking even more crisis intelligence with you next Sunday.